Thank you for viewing the For Love of Children distance learning webinar, Finessing the FAFSA. During this webinar, we're going to be talking about some tips for completing your FAFSA, some different types of student aid, and some resources for maximizing the amount of student aid that you'll get for the following year. Let's start off by talking about what you can do before you even start to fill out your FAFSA. Before you even begin, you should gather the required information. A checklist of the information that you'll need to complete your FAFSA can be found at the Student Aid website here. You should assume that you'll also need the parental information listed in this checklist. Another issue that some students encounter while trying to file the FAFSA is that there will be questions and categories that they don't fully understand. If this does happen, there are a number of resources that you can use to find out whether or not a question applies to you and how you should answer it. If you aren't certain about how to begin the financial aid application process, it might be helpful to begin here. Do you know what your PIN is? If not, you should take time to visit the PIN website here. For students who are categorized as dependents, the FAFSA will also require a parent signature. And this is most easily done by electronically signing with a parental PIN number. Just as a note, you can get your PIN before you even start to fill out your FAFSA, before it's even available to fill out for the coming academic year. If you aren't sure whether or not you qualify as a dependent, review the information provided here. There are a number of different factors which go into determining whether or not you qualify as dependent or independent on the FAFSA, so it might be helpful to review them on the studentaid.gov website. You can begin filling out your FAFSA as early as January 1st. You should begin filling out your FAFSA as early as January 1st. By doing this, you can make sure that you've got all the information that you need to accurately complete your FAFSA, including your PIN number and updated documentation. The absolute latest that you can complete your FAFSA and expect student aid reasonably for the 2013 to 2014 academic year should be June 30th, 2013. Although if you haven't filled it out by then, the FAFSA is typically open until the end of the following academic year. So it's not too late, but you will miss out on a large amount of student aid if you do that. And you should actually submit it well before June 30th because some colleges and universities have earlier deadlines. So you should check the school's websites to make sure that you know when that is. Additionally, many kinds of financial aid are first come, first serve, which means that there is a pool of funds that gets dispersed based on who files the FAFSA and applies to it first. There's also states that have earlier deadlines, so depending on whether or not you're attending a particular institution and there's state-based aid or you're going to a public state-funded university, that might be very relevant to you as well. Once you've submitted your FAFSA, you can always go back and update it or modify it. So the best course of action, and this is something that I've heard from a number of FAFSA educators and advisors, is that all students who are filing their FAFSA should fill it out as early as possible. And you can also estimate information. So if you are not sure what your parents' tax and income amounts were for the previous year, you should estimate what it was based on the year prior to that. And then once your parents get their tax information back, and also this applies to you if you have tax information, you can go back and update your FAFSA with the correct information. In light of the fact that timing does matter, you should be sure to apply every year if there's even the slightest chance that you might wind up attending a post-secondary institute during the following academic year. Filing your FAFSA doesn't obligate you to accept any kind of aid or attend any particular program. If you file early, there is a much better chance that you'll receive aid later on. And even if there's a chance that you might not be enrolled in a program, if you do wind up doing that, if you change your mind or you decide that you're going back to a different program, filing early will prevent you from having to worry about not being eligible for certain kinds of aid. Basically, filing your FAFSA can't hurt, and it might help. And there are a number of popular misconceptions about the FAFSA. Most of them revolve around students thinking that for some reason or another they won't qualify for aid, so it would be a waste of time to complete the FAFSA. The two common reasons for this include that thinking that one's parents make too much money for the student to qualify for aid, or that aid requires a higher GPA than the student has. There are a number of factors which go into determining whether or not you're eligible for aid, of which parental income is only one. There are no income cutoffs for certain kinds of aid, which still require the FAFSA, including student loans and some grants and scholarships. The scholarship offered by For Love of Children, for example, requires you to file your FAFSA. In response to the other myth that GPA might not be high enough for you to be qualified for any kind of aid, while there are grants and scholarships that do require a high GPA, many don't. Requirements for certain federal and state grants will be reviewed later in this webinar have eligibility for students with average GPA that is based on other sort of factors in determining your award amount. And there's also a misconception that the FAFSA is very difficult to fill out and time-consuming to fill out. However, if you prepare by gathering the required documents and you have a PIN number for yourself and your parents or guardians, the FAFSA is actually really easy to complete, and the average time that people take to file their FAFSA to complete all of the questions is 22 minutes, so that's not too long. If you've got any questions about your FAFSA, you can visit the website here, or if you're having a lot of difficulty, you can call the helpline under this number or email for information here. One issue that I've encountered with a number of students is that a parent is not a U.S. citizen, or for whatever other reason doesn't have a social security number, and this causes a lot of people to hit a confusing roadblock in the FAFSA application process. For students whose parents don't have a social security number, you won't be able to obtain an electronic PIN for them. And while you're filling out the FAFSA, you or a parent must enter all zeros in the parent social security number category, that is 000000000. When you reach the end of the FAFSA, you'll have to select the option to print signature page. And you'll want to have your parent sign this and then mail it to the address printed on the page. Another issue regarding your parents might be that you're unsure what their income was or what they paid in taxes last year. I covered this a little bit before, but in addition to just sort of estimating based on the previous year, you can also select have not filed federal income taxes but plan to do so. And the latest that you can do this for the 2013 to 2014 academic year is April 15th. Once you find out for certain what those amounts are, you can go back and update the FAFSA. Also, if your parents' income is low enough, given the number of people in your household, they won't actually need to file their taxes for you to be able to complete the FAFSA. And if you're really curious about what the amount is for your household, if taxes have already been filed or you're waiting for your, I think it's D40 form, you can find out at this page on the IRS website. And there's also an income estimator here. So you should probably check that out. You can also file your taxes online, and to do that, just go to this website. And one mistake that I've seen students made is to use the information from the year before last and just keep that as if that is the correct amount. So you should be aware of which taxes, which year of taxes you should put on the FAFSA. If you're filing your FAFSA for the 2013 through 2014 academic year, you should be using income information from the year 2012, not the year 2011, for example. And one tip for filing your FAFSA is to, if you're unsure of what the correct answer is, which I already mentioned, or if you mean to answer 0, don't leave the answer blank. Put in a 0 or estimate. If you leave the answer blank, it might cause miscalculations in the amount of expected aid, and it might even cause your application to be rejected. Another thing that you'll want to do is to add every single school that has the remotest chance of being one that you'll attend for the next academic year. And once again, this doesn't obligate you to do anything, but your financial aid awards might be dependent on your having included them. And one question that I've also heard from people and have had myself as a student was about the summer semester and which FAFSA year does that fall into. Your summer semester will be covered by the FAFSA that you should have completed the previous year. So if you need aid for the summer of 2014, for example, the relevant FAFSA would be the 2013 through 2014 FAFSA that you're able to fill out beginning January 1st, 2013. The FAFSA for the summer of this calendar year, 2013, this coming summer, is associated with the 2012 through 2013 FAFSA that you should have filled out sometime last year. Once you've finished your FAFSA, you can move on by viewing the page on the Federal Student Aid website that deals with what to do next. And you can go to that here. And you should also be sure to send your student aid report, if you have scholarships that require that, to whichever agency is dispersing those scholarships. But the page that's linked to has information on how to find out whether or not your FAFSA has been processed, who to contact about your completed FAFSA, and who will be contacting you, and what to do if you've made mistakes or need to update your FAFSA. It'll also have a little bit more information on how to accept your student aid, and typically that is through your college, university, or other post-secondary institute. But once your FAFSA has been fully completed and corrected, the institute that you'll primarily be dealing with is going to be, like I said, the financial aid office at your college or university, who, once again, you will be accepting your aid awards through. And it varies from university to university. It's sometimes the bursar's office, sometimes the cashier's office I've seen a few times, but it is going to be a department in your university or college. And once you've finished your FAFSA, you'll want to start looking into sources of aid beyond federal grants, loans, and work-study to find out what scholarships and non-federal grants which you might be eligible for. We'll move on to this in a moment. Obviously, a good place to look if you're interested in making sure that you fully understand the FAFSA is going to be the official Federal Student Aid website, which I think, linked to several times so far. But they've got a resource page that has loads of really useful information that you can view and download here. In addition to that, you can take advantage of the Twitter and Facebook pages run by the Federal Student Aid Department. You can friend them on Facebook here. I know that Facebook is becoming somewhat less popular, but you can also follow them for federal aid information on Twitter here. And every month on Twitter, they have office hours where they answer questions. So if you're having an issue that isn't super urgent or that you're otherwise curious about, feel free to ask there. And you can also tap into all the previous office hour tweets that they've made at Storify right here. Also, if you're interested in watching videos on the FAFSA, you can visit their YouTube channel here. And if you'd like to check out some infographics, you should check out their activity stream here. And there are 4 major types of aid. There's loans, grants, scholarships, and work study. You should say yes to all of these when you're filling out your FAFSA. The reason being that this doesn't obligate you to anything, and if you select no, it really precludes you from certain financial aid opportunities. And that can make a huge difference if you find out that you're a little bit short in terms of the financial aid that you have to cover your tuition. And it's pretty clear what the difference is between loans and other forms of aid, primarily, namely that you have to repay loans later on, and work study and other forms of aid. Work study is, just to define that, kind of like a job. So you've got to work for your aid. It's typically part-time and on campus. I'll talk about that more later. The difference between grants and scholarships can be kind of amorphous or unclear. So we're going to start with what they have in common. Both of them are free money. You're awarded the amount, and you don't have to pay it back like you would with loans, and you don't have to work for it in the same way that you would a part-time job like work study. And another thing that the two have in common is that they vary widely in requirements and the amounts that you're awarded, and that's about where the similarities end. While this isn't always the case, once you're awarded a grant, you'll typically not need to maintain a particular set of requirements. For example, a high GPA, once you've been awarded the amount. They might not even be academic. Some grants are, for example, for particular projects and other things that, you know, might be relevant to you as a college student. And this was probably a bit more relevant for graduate students, but the types of grants that you can get to cover projects, like, for example, research expenses during your doctoral dissertation, they'll typically require you to follow up with a detailed report. Grants aren't always, but they usually are offered by nonprofit organizations, and as such, they're usually, but are not always, tax exempt. In contrast, scholarships are often offered by both nonprofit and for-profit organizations. Also, in contrast to grants, they typically have a set of requirements that a student must maintain in order to keep receiving the scholarship, like a certain GPA, for example. And both scholarships and grants do have initial requirements that students must meet before they're considered eligible for a grant. And also, unlike a grant, scholarships are more or less always used for expenses related to education. They, As I noted earlier, scholarships are often offered by both nonprofit and for-profit agencies. So they're somewhat more likely to be taxable. A scholarship is usually tax-free, though, if it's used to cover the costs of tuition, fees, and books for your courses. It might not be tax-free if it's used to pay for room and board, living expenses, travel, or research, for example. And those you might have to include when you're filing your taxes. Additionally, if you're enrolled in a non-degree program, as many certification programs are, your scholarships are taxable regardless of what they're used to pay for. So if you're enrolled at a community college or a, for example, for-profit vocational institute, you will need to include your scholarships on your taxes regardless of what you use them to pay for. Either way, you should really check in with the institute that's granting you the scholarships to find out whether or not you need to include them on your taxes. And there are really only 2 broad categories of loans that are available to students. there's federal loans and private loans, which are sometimes known as alternative loans. We won't be really covering private loans in this webinar, but I would advise against pursuing them except as your very last option, as they tend to have variable interest rates that could easily cause you to owe more than you would have with federal loans, more than you would have expected, calculating the amount of interest that you'll have to pay as well. And federal loans have fixed rates, which do not change. You should be aware that if you choose to pursue private loans, they're dependent on credit, and if you have, like, your credit score, not college credits, and if you have adverse credit, bad credit score, you might not qualify for a private student loan. There's also one federal loan in particular that is based on credit, and we'll talk about that in a bit. There are a few major types of federal loans. Federal student loans, and the first and the most common kinds are Stafford loans. And these are available for all students. They're not dependent on income. They're not dependent on your GPA. They are only dependent on whether or not you're enrolled full-time as a student. Well, they actually do take into consideration whether you're enrolled full-time or part-time, I believe. But we can talk about that later. Another kind of federal loan is the Perkins loan, which is available on the basis of financial need. The third major kind is the PLUS loan, and this is typically only available for graduate students, although if you have a parent with good credit to co-sign on this, then you can also be considered for a PLUS loan. Stafford loans are loans which may be subsidized or unsubsidized, and this means that the government may pay for your interest while you're a student in the case of subsidized loans, or they may not in the case of unsubsidized loans. To get a subsidized loan, you must show demonstrable financial need, which is reflected in your FAFSA. Any student can get an unsubsidized loan, though. The amount of your loan will vary depending on your class standing and your financial need, and also your dependency status. To check the loan amount that you might be eligible for, you can go here and review the limits, and this will also be part of your award amounts that you can determine by contacting your financial aid department once you've completed your FAFSA. Unsubsidized Stafford loans have an annual 6.8% fixed interest rate. Subsidized ones have an annual 3.4% interest rate, although I believe that this has actually gone up for the 2013 through 2014 year. So you should definitely check out the web page for that. You can go here to do that. And this will give you a little bit more information on the interest rate for the subsidized and the unsubsidized Stafford loans. And basically, let's take the 6.8% example. It means that for every dollar of your principal amount, that is the total amount of your loans, you're going to be charged an interest of 6.8 cents each year for an unsubsidized loan and 3.4 cents each year for a subsidized one, assuming that the 3.4 is the correct amount of interest. And the interest is compounded monthly, which means that every month the amount of unpaid interest that's accrued during that month gets added to your principal amount. Once it's added to the principal, you're charged interest on that as well. Basically, this means that you're being charged interest on your interest. If you're awarded a Stafford loan, you'll also have a 1% loan fee, and this will be taken out of your disbursement check, but you'll be responsible for repaying it. And like many kinds of student financial aid, you must complete your FAFSA before you're eligible to receive either of these. Now, FAFSA or Stafford loans have what's called a grace period of 6 months. this may no longer be the case. According to the website, it is the case, but a recent conference that I went to actually said that that might be changing. Website also says that the interest rate is still 3.4 for subsidized loans. But once again, the information that I received previously said that that might be changing. However, at this point, the website still has that as the interest rates, and it also says that there is still a 6-month grace period for your FAFSA. So basically, once you have stopped being enrolled as a full-time student or a half-time student, namely taking at least 6 credits, you won't have to pay the monthly amount owed for your loan, although many students do choose to start repayment anyway to avoid paying a large amount of interest on their loans. Perkins loans are awarded only to undergraduate and graduate students who have demonstrated a certain degree of financial need. And like a subsidized Stafford loan, the interest on these loans will be paid off by the government while you're enrolled as a student. Unlike the Stafford loan, you're going to have a 9-month grace period once you're no longer enrolled as a student for at least half-time credits, that is 6 credits at a minimum. After you stop being enrolled as a student, wow, did I already say that? I might have. But you'll have a 9-month grace period once you're no longer enrolled as a half-time student or more. These loans have a 5% interest rate, so a little bit higher than the unsubsidized Stafford. If you want to figure out how much interest you'll wind up paying, you can take the interest accumulation process described for Stafford loans, but do it with a 5% rate instead. These loans are actually granted by the post-secondary student that you're attending, by the way. So what this means is that depending on where you're enrolled, you might not actually be able to get it if your school is not participating, and the amounts might vary depending on where you're attending. The upper limit set by the federal government for these kinds of loans is $5,500 per year and $27,500 in your lifetime for undergraduate studies. If you are going to graduate school, you can borrow $8,000 per year, academic year, and that includes, for both of these, both the fall and the spring semester. So for the $8,000 amount, you'll get $4,000 in the fall and then another $4,000 in the spring. And for graduate students, there is a maximum of $60,000 in your lifetime. This last number includes undergraduate loans as well. So if you've borrowed $27,500 for undergrad already, then you can only borrow $36,500 more while you're in graduate school. Unlike the Stafford loans, Perkins loans don't charge a fee at the time of disbursement. Plus loans are those other loans that I was talking about before, a federal loan that is credit-based, credit score-based. Plus loans are only awarded to graduate students or the parents of graduate students. You should be aware that if you or your parents have very bad credit, then you might need someone with better credit to act as an endorser. And it doesn't have to be your parent who endorses you, but it does make that person liable if you don't repay your loan in terms of it reflecting poorly on their own credit. So you should make sure that the other person is aware of this, because it really puts them kind of on the line as far as their credit score goes. Plus loans have a 7.9% interest rate, so a bit higher than the Stafford or Perkins loans. And they also have a 4% disbursement fee that's taken out of the check that you are cent for your tuition and fees, and you're going to be still accountable for repaying that 4%. And before I talk about repaying your student loans, I would like to briefly go over what happens if you don't repay your student loans. When you go for a long enough period of time without repaying your student loans, they will go into default. That means several things. Your employer, first of all, I'm just going to flash this. Default is bad, and it should be avoided. Your employer can, at the request of the government, garnish, withhold, garnish means withhold, but they can withhold your pay and send it to the lenders instead of giving it to you as payment in order to repay your federal student loans. This is sort of determined by the government and collection agencies and so on and so forth. But you lose eligibility for future financial aid if you go into default as well. That could really impact your academic career if you plan on continuing as a student. It means that you won't be eligible for federal student aid. You also lose eligibility for deferment, forbearance, and payment plans. You might have your taxes withheld, and your loan is assigned to a collection agency, and this is going to negatively impact your credit score. In short, to reiterate, defaulting on your student loan is bad and should be avoided. To avoid default, you'll need to make payments to your loan servicer, and these are usually required monthly. Find out who your servicer is and contact them directly to set up a payment plan or to determine eligibility for loan deferment or forbearance. You can find out more about loan services here, and you can read more about repayment plans here. There are a number of repayment plans which are income-based, so if you have a large amount of student loan debt, but you're starting in an entry-level position in your field, or you're starting in an unrelated position that is very low-paying in, for example, food service or retail, which happens sometimes once people graduate from college. But for whatever reason, if you don't have a high enough income to begin paying more than a certain amount, looking into deferment options and graduated repayment plans might be a good choice for you. If you haven't managed to find a job, or your job is barely enough to make ends meet, you probably qualify for an economic hardship deferment. There are also full-time service positions which you can apply for, which will allow you to defer repayment of your loans. And probably the most common of these are military positions, where you can defer payment of your student loans for the duration of your time of active service, and AmeriCorps, which is a national service volunteer program, which typically offers you a year-long contract during which you can put your student loans into deferment or forbearance, and you can look at some deferment and forbearance options here. If you're struggling with your student loan, the absolute worst thing that you can do about it is to ignore your lender. This can have pretty serious ramifications for you in the future. And if you're having issues, always contact your loan servicer. They're usually pretty understanding about whatever it is that you might be going through and are willing to explore some options with you. And there are a number of different types of grants that you might find available to you with a little bit of searching. There are a few common types, and that includes student-specific grants, which are typically given based on some aspect of the student's background or activities, and this could include your financial need, membership in an underrepresented population, for example, gender or racial ethnic group, status as a non-traditionally aged student, namely an older student, military service, or membership in a particular kind of club or activity, and so on and so forth. There are also subject-specific grants, and these are based on your major, your degree concentration, or your program type. The purpose of these kinds of grants is typically to promote growth in a particular sector of the economy by adding incentive for students to go into a particular field or program of study. So fields more directly related to certain types of careers, like engineering or teaching or nursing, for example. may be more likely to have grants that are available to them than other fields. There's also degree level specific. That means it's restricted to a particular level of study, and many of the kinds of grants that are available to undergraduate students, for example, are not available to graduate students, and vice versa. Many of the grants that are available to someone who's studying for a PhD aren't available to students who are studying for their bachelor's, for example. And there are also project-based grants, and these are used to fund a particular project. And an example that I used before was doing graduate level research. And some kinds of research will require funding, and you can apply for grants within your college or university as well as from outside sources to fund these. A common stipulation with these kinds of grants is to write a proposal. It's a requirement that you've got to complete. And then follow up with a report on the progress of your project. There's also non-academic grants, which I won't really be talking about because it's less relevant for you. And a major source of grants for students is the federal government, which awards the Pell Grants, the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or FSEOG, and a number of other types of grants that I'll touch on briefly in a moment. States also provide grants to students, and the most relevant that you'll probably know about is DC TAG and DC CAP. We'll get into that in a bit. There's also some non-governmental organizations like colleges and universities or corporations or religious organizations or clubs and so on and so forth that offer grants to students, so be aware of those. Let's talk about the federal Pell Grant. The most common kind of federal grant for students is the federal Pell Grant. And currently the maximum amount that you can get for the academic year is $5,550, excuse me. Although you might be eligible for less depending on your income and how many credit hours you're enrolled in, and specifically if you're a full-time or part-time student. As of July 2012, you can receive a Pell Grant for a maximum of 12 semesters. In other words, 6 regular fall and spring academic years. To apply for a Pell Grant, all you need to do is complete your FAFSA, and you can see an estimate for how much you'll be awarded on your student aid report, or your SAR. You can contact your college or university's financial aid department to find out how much you're actually awarded and how to accept your award. And these grants are typically only available to undergraduate students. Additionally, conviction and incarceration or other kinds of civil commitment as a result of certain kinds of crimes, most notably sexual crimes, will render you ineligible for the federal Pell Grant. To view more information about the Pell Grant, visit this link here. There is also the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or FSEOG. There is not necessarily a set amount of how much an FSEOG will be, but it is primarily need-based and also administered directly by your college rather than being administered by the federal government. The amount awarded per academic year can range from $100 to $4,000. So 2,000 in the spring, 2,000 in the fall, or reverse the order of those. But like the Pell Grant, to apply for a FSEOG, all you need to do is complete your FAFSA, and you must complete your FAFSA to be considered eligible for it. Note again, you can also visit this page to learn more about the FSEOG in general. And you can contact your college or university for more information about whether or not you might be eligible for one. Another popular kind of federal grant is the TEACH grant. Unlike the previously mentioned federal grants, TEACH grants are specific to the program rather than specific to student need. And these come with a much more involved set of requirements and obligations. Students applying for a Teach grant must be enrolled in programs which prepare them for teaching, and they have to maintain a GPA of at least 3.25. You can visit this webpage to learn more about what programs, what academic programs and courses of study are eligible for Teach grants. And furthermore, students awarded these grants must sign an agreement to serve. This will obligate you to serve as a full-time teacher for at least 4 years in a high-need field in a low-income school. You can visit this page here to learn more about what qualifies as a high-need field. Students who fail to follow through with this agreement will have their Teach grants converted into unsubsidized loans and will owe all of the amount of the loan as well as the interest accrued on the loan. For information about Teach grants in general, you can visit this page. There are a few grants which are available based on military service as well. If your parent or guardian died as a result of involvement in the Iraq or Afghanistan war and you're not eligible for a Pell Grant, not that that is a requirement, you can't be eligible for the Pell, you might be eligible for up to $5,550 from the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant. And you can learn more about this grant here. There are also grants that are available through the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, which you can learn a bit more about here. I won't really go into much more detail than that. Furthermore, there are a wide array of additional grants and tuition assistance funds available for various types of military service, and there's a more comprehensive list here. Also, it might be worth noting that there is REOC, which does pay for your education. And there are also other kinds of military grants that aren't provided directly by the federal government in the same way that other federal grants are, and you should look into third-party organizations if you are in the military or have been in the military. Another kind of federal grant for education is the Segal AmeriCorps Education Grant, and these are awarded for a year of service which you must complete, which you're contractually obliged to complete, with AmeriCorps for the amount of $5,550. You're noticing a theme there. This amount is not awarded until after you've completed your required amount of service hours, and it may only be applied to education expenses. You can learn more about it here. Also note that completing a term of service with AmeriCorps basically means that you're working a full-time job, so you should be aware of that if you want to do this kind of volunteering, in the sense that it probably will preclude you from pursuing academic goals for that year. There are also state tuition assistance programs, and as mentioned before, the most relevant for FLOC students is the DC TAG Award. And the deadline for the DC TAG for the 2013 through 2014 academic year is May 31st, 2013. So be aware of that and try to file as soon as possible. This is a first-come, first-serve award, so the sooner the better. If you're studying outside of DC, you may be eligible for other kinds of aid in the state that you are living and your college or university is located. So you should also look into that. For example, if you're going to a college or university in New York State, and you're living there and have been for at least 12 months, you are eligible for the Tuition Assistance Program, or New York TAP, so long as you provide proof of residency. And you can look into whether or not the state that you're currently living in offers some sort of similar tuition assistance. But for a moment, I'd actually like to get back to the DC Tag Award. DC Tag, you have to meet the requirements that are listed here, and you have to complete your completing your DC1 app and your FAFSA, as well as submitting required documentation, including your student aid report to verify that you have completed your FAFSA, a certified DC income tax return, that is your D40, one current utility bill, an unofficial college transcript, and an affirmation and legal disclaimer statement with original signature. To learn more, you can follow the link that I've kept up here. You should always apply for DC Tag. The amount of the award that you'll get varies depending on what type of institution that you're enrolled in. I'd like to note you can... that's interesting. Students enrolled in four-year public colleges and universities will be eligible for up to $10,000 per year and $50,000 in your lifetime. And students who are enrolled in private colleges and universities in the DC area or in HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities nationwide, or in community colleges will be eligible for $2,500 per year. Students at private institutions are eligible for up to $12,500 in their lifetime, while students enrolled at community colleges are eligible for $10,000 in their lifetimes. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about that, you should visit the page here. For those who are eligible, you should also apply to DC CAP. The application can be found here. Yeah, that was weird. Weird little quirk of the slideshow there. Sorry about that. So let's move on to talking about scholarships. You should be familiar with these from the previous slides on grants, but the difference with these is that there are also more merit-based options. Merit-based scholarships are dependent on your academic performance, and they can also include other things like athletic achievement, a high IQ test score, artistic ability, or debating prowess, or a number of other types of talents and performance records. Also included on here that wasn't on the grants section is college-specific scholarships. Those are granted to students who go to a specific college or colleges or universities. And there's also new on here the career-specific scholarships, which are granted to students in majors leading to specific careers, kind of like the TEACH grants, except they're scholarships. For applying to scholarships, you should apply early and you should apply often, and that's really it in terms of tips for that. Just don't stop applying to scholarships. And this could mean the difference between being able to pay for all of your college career and not being able to finish your undergraduate career. So make sure you do it. As if I hadn't said it enough already, the first step for this is filling out your FAFSA. Then you can visit some of these websites here. Now, these websites allow you to browse for scholarships, which you might qualify for based on your major, your hobbies, your skills, your GPA, your religion, your location, income, and so on and so forth. Don't forget to visit your college's website for potential scholarship opportunities specific to your campus. A number of colleges offer scholarships to their students which aren't listed on the websites here. So that's something that you should definitely look into. I've heard of a number of students getting scholarships they didn't realize exist because they checked out their college's financial aid website. You should do this between each semester. So every semester apply for more scholarships. Doesn't matter if you have enough scholarships to pay for your entire education. You should still apply for more just to make sure. And for those of you who aren't already familiar with this, work study is sort of like a part-time job that's paid for by both the federal government and your employer. students must file a FAFSA and select yes to the question, would you like to be considered for work study, in order to be eligible for work study. And you have to follow up with your financial aid department. It's need-based. Not everyone is eligible. And like most other things, it is first come, first serve. So you've got to get on that. That's one of the more popular forms of aid to just sort of wind up running out. So be aware of that. And work study actually isn't offered by all post-secondary institutes. It is something that you need to check with your financial aid department with. And it can be available at all levels for full-time students, part-time students, undergraduate, grad students, professional students, people who are doing certain types of research, and so on and so forth. Your institution will try to match you, usually with work related to your field of study. So again, like with other forms of aid, sort of the sooner the better in terms of applying for that. And that's the end of this show. I hope that you found some of this useful. Please complete the survey here. And I will be available for questions if you've got any sort of curiosity about any of the topics covered here. You can email me here, and I will do my best to answer you.